The Locked On Podcast Network presents the College Sports Big 3 in 30. The three biggest stories in college sports. From our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. Bringing you the real story. Why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The College Sports Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in college sports.
Diego Claus delivers a big gift for the offense on this Christmas Eve.
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores.
One of the biggest gifts, pun intended, that Vandy football could get underneath the tree. And Diego Claus has delivered that. And the reason why I say Diego Claus is because it's a direct result of what he just went through and fought for that extra year. Now, the NCAA has said JUCO don't count. And I think they're retroactively, I can't remember how far back they're going. I don't really want to look that up. But I can tell you this much. It's going to affect Stephen Hubbard, and in a good way. Now he's coming back, and he's getting that extra year because of Diego Pavia. Now, this is – now, I got a lot of flack on the squad show because people think it's going to ruin JUCO football and it's going to have this ripple effect that I just don't think it's going to have. Not anymore. It's not going to affect anything any more than the transfer portal and NIL is, right? I think it's going to make it to where I think it'll probably it'll affect the G5 schools because they have been previously getting those partial qualifiers. Like, let's say, somebody doesn't have the ACT score coming out of high school, they end up going to, say, FIU because FIU will take a partial qualifier. Well, instead of FIU getting that guy, he may elect to go to East Mississippi, JUCO, or he may elect to go to Independence, or he may elect to go to Laney out in California. Like, he's going to get his prep year and sign. And honestly, I just don't think that's going to affect anything because if the guy can play, he's going to portal out of you. He's going to portal out of your program within a year anyway, and he's going to end up at a North Carolina or Colorado or Alabama or wherever, major P4 school anyway. So you're not really going to have that dude. So you just need to if that dude's going to play, it's going to just change things a little bit, but FIU is going to get guys that are going to portal in from FCS, or they're going to get guys there's plenty of the portal with this new roster ruling. The portal is about to triple in the amount of players that's going to be it's going to be a never ending cycle. There's always going to be players available, whether it's your transfer. There's a lot of junior colleges that you can pick from if you're if you're an FCS school, if you're a D2 school, if you are. I mean, there's a lot of guys that aren't even going to get offered anything that you're going to be able to get out of high school. There's going to be portal guys that get bumped from a Purdue that ends up at FIU because they think they can go to Michigan and they just don't. And so the whole ripple effect of this thing is not really going to be that big of a deal. So I don't really know why people are all up in arms about it. I think JUCO from the jump should have not have counted. I think you should have been able. I think JUCO should be, I don't know about the whole 2-year thing. I think that might be a little much, but it's not going to count, and I don't have any problem with that. Whether or not Diego Pavia was, it could have been Ben Johnson from Cal that could have fought the NCAA on this and made the ruling. It could have been anybody. I would have had no problem with it, whoever it was. I think it's good. I think it's good for these partial qualifiers, these guys that need that junior college prep work to be able to get themselves a chance at NIL, to be able to give themselves a chance at proper development for the NFL, depending on what route they take. So it's going to be, it's going to be interesting to kind of see how it goes. They've got to get the transfer portal under control because it's getting crazy. And this whole notion of guys transferring in the middle, I think they need to figure out a window to where guys can portal in and out of, and it not affect the playoff or the bowl games, or I don't know. It's somebody that's got that's going to get paid way more than me to figure this out and needs to figure this out, because I think it's a little ridiculous. I like the idea of the portal. I just think it just needs a little bit of guardrails, or it's going to just kind of go all over the place. But anyway, I'm getting away from my original point here. And the point of this is, Vandy, you might as well call this a portal edition, because Steve Hubbard was supposed to be gone, and now he's not. He's going to be the left tackle for the bowl game, so he's going to get his chance to prove himself as the left tackle, which I think is the quick side, maybe. If they're still doing quick and strong, I'm not even sure if they're still doing that, but he's going to play tackle instead of guard for the bowl game, so he's going to get his chance to prove himself there. But I love this because he's a guy that's now been in the system for a while. He's performed extremely well within this system. He's a guy that is going to be heavily relied on throughout this whole process. He's going to be mentoring these new transfers, these, the couple of freshmen they brought in from last year's class, and some of the other portal guys that were, that didn't play as much. He's going to be, and there's going to be more offensive linemen coming in. So this is going to be great for Coach Klenakis and that group, because you get another starter coming back, right? Stephen Lasoya just declares for the NFL draft. That, not surprised there. I think he'll get picked somewhere in like the 4th, 5th round, because centers don't get picked very high, but I think he will do well because he's a smart guy, gritty guy. He knows what's going on. I think he can play center in the league and be very, very successful because he's a really good communicator. And the only reason he bumped over to play guard is because Castillo was not doing well at guard, because he's big and he can't move, and center requires less movement than guard. So it was kind of out of necessity. But, Lasoya probably will be a center in the league if I had to guess, and I think he'll fit in really well. So this is a really good thing for this offensive line to get Hubbard back. It's like a portal edition that is eligible to play in the bowl game, which is amazing. So big deal there. Love that. But, this defense is going to have its hands full as well, trying to shut down Haynes King. But again, like I said, in the very first chance I got to talk about Georgia Tech, Vandy just needs to look in the mirror as far as game prep against this offense.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if that first $5 bet hits. And you can go ahead and take a look at the second round of the college football playoff. Despite already having beaten Ohio State, Oregon, 2.5-point underdogs against the Buckeyes in the Rose Bowl, I may or may not already have an Oregon plus 2.5 ticket in my pocket. Penn State heads into the Fiesta Bowl favored by 10.5 over Heisman runner-up Ashton Genty and the Boise State Broncos. Both teams are combined 10-0 in the Fiesta despite the larger line. This should be a good one. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
All right, tell me if you've heard this one before. One of Notre Dame's best players on the defensive side of the ball is out for the remainder of the 2024 season with an injury. Unfortunately, Notre Dame's star defensive tackle and captain Riley Mills is the next star player out for this season. Marcus Freeman made the announcement on Monday that Riley Mills is going to be out for the remainder of the college football playoffs, and there is no way to spin this. This is a really tough blow for the Notre Dame defense and the Notre Dame team at large, because Mills is a captain. He's one of the unquestioned leaders of this team, and he has a presence not just when he's on the field, but off the field as well. And it's obviously going to be harder for him and that leadership to shine through when he's not actually playing. I would say the only thing that's surprising about this is the fact that the news came out just a couple of days after the game, because when the game ended, Marcus Freeman went on SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt and told him that he got news that it wasn't a season-ending injury, and they were hoping to get him ready in the next 10 to 11 days. But obviously he underwent some further testing, and he is going to be out for the remainder of the playoffs. And it is a very, very tough pill to swallow. Now, Gabriel Rubio is going to have to step in and play a bigger role than he probably ever has in his career. Howard Cross is probably not going to be able to come off the field nearly as much. They're not going to be able to rotate as much without a guy like Riley Mills going up against a very physical front on Georgia. And obviously, this is just a really tough break for the Notre Dame defense, but I also just feel so bad for Riley Mills because this is a terrible way for his college career to end. He comes back for one more year to be a captain, to be a leader, and to play in the college football playoffs. They make it to the playoffs. His first half against Indiana was some of the best play I've ever seen from Riley Mills in his career. He was just a dominant force up the middle. And even on the play that he got hurt, the reason he got hurt is because he just completely dominated. His blocker was in the backfield. Him and Bryce Young were right there. Bryce Young got the sack, and it looks like they just collided knees there. So the fact that he was playing so well and then his season is cut short like this is just incredibly disappointing. And we could talk about the impact that it has on this Notre Dame team, but I just genuinely feel awful for these guys in these moments because they work so hard to get to this point. And then for it to all just taken away like that is just, it's devastating. So I feel for Riley Mills. And, will it be the backbreaker? Like, it's hard to say, right? Because this is just another great player in the Notre Dame defense. They lost Benjamin Morrison, they lost Boubacar Traore, they lost Jordan Botello, and now Riley Mills. And that's just on the defense. Jason Onye also on the defense. He stepped aside. He's obviously not going to be back on the team for the rest of the year. We know about the injuries on the offensive line too. So it is just a really tough break for this Notre Dame defensive line. And they have been able to get by for the most part, even despite the fact that they lost Howard Cross for a couple games in there as well. They have been able to just rotate guys in and figure it out. But obviously it's a little bit different when you're trying to rotate guys in going up against Notre Dame's regular season schedule compared to Georgia, who has been by far the best program in college football in recent years. So now when I look at that matchup between Notre Dame's defensive line and Georgia's offensive line, I felt like maybe going into this game, if you have Riley Mills and Howard Cross, but everyone's all healthy, I think Notre Dame had a slight advantage in that matchup going up against Georgia's offensive front because they have dealt with some injuries so far this year. But I will say that Georgia offensive line has been playing probably their best football all season over the last month of the year. Now, if you're Notre Dame, you got to be hoping for like a draw at best there. And even then, that might be tough to achieve because Mills is just that good. And now, Notre Dame is basically going to have to make up for Mills' loss in every other phase of the game. The rest of the defense are going to have to get even more exotic. Al Golden is going to have to be even more creative, drawing up pressures. The good thing is we got some somewhat better, not better news, but some positive news on the injury front. Kingsley Viliamu-Asa is going to be back at practice. I don't know if he's going to be able to play or how much of a factor he's going to be, but it's going to take all hands on deck for Notre Dame to be able to beat Georgia. Al Golden is a mastermind. We've already talked about that, so he's going to have even more pressure on him to figure out a way for Notre Dame to stop Georgia's running game and also get pressure on Gunnar Stockton because for as much of a bummer as this is, Georgia is also without their starting quarterback in this game, so injuries are happening across football. When you play a 16 to 17 game schedule now, you're going to see more injuries. You got to play more games. More guys are going to go down. This is just the reality of college football. And also, when you have so many guys transferring around and stuff, like it's going to hurt depth. And I think in the future, once this new walk-on rule comes into effect, there's going to be even more issues because teams are not going to have as many guys on the roster, which is going to affect how practice works. But that's getting a little bit too far ahead. I just think that Notre Dame is going to have to play better in every other phase to make up for this. So let's talk about what they can improve from the Indiana game to make sure that they can make up for Mills' loss. I think the offense left a little bit too many points on the board. They had 3 drives stalled that resulted in field goal attempts. Now, the one right before the half that happens, they didn't have that much time, but then they had 2 other drives where they were driving the ball down the field, and then they just came up short. Against Georgia, that's not going to happen because they probably aren't going to have as many positive drives. So whenever they get in the red zone or close to the red zone, they absolutely have to get 6 points on the board there. And I understand that Indiana has a good rush defense, statistically one of the best rush defenses in the country. They held Notre Dame's running game in check for the most part. Jeremiah Love had that 98-yard touchdown run, but other than that, they weren't really getting anything going on the ground. Like Jadarian Price didn't really have his break-off run. He had 11 carries for 32 yards. Love was held in check the remainder of the game, but he did have that one great play where he stiff-armed that defender into like the core of the earth there. So they're going to have to figure some things out. I think the offensive line was still kind of getting things figured out. They lost Rocco Spindler, the right guard in that game. Sam Pendleton came in. I think Rocco Spindler is probably going to be able to go. It looked like a concussion. He was in street clothes for the end of that game, but not totally sure. Either way, the offensive line is going to have to step up because Georgia's defensive line is one of, if not the best in the entire country. And I just feel like Mitchell Evans is going to have to be a factor. Like, he was absent in terms of production for the majority of that game against Indiana. And then when the one play where he did have a catch, he immediately fumbled it. Fortunately, Jordan Faison was right there, but you expect a little bit more from a guy who's been around and who is as talented as Mitchell Evans. So on offense, they got to capitalize on those opportunities when they get the ball on the other side of the field. They got to get Mitchell Evans more involved. He's one of their best players. So he's got to play a little bit better, and then offensive line is going to have to step up to the challenge going up against Georgia because Notre Dame is going to have to be able to run the ball a little bit more. I'd like to see a little bit more from Bo Collins as well. He had a nice catch on third down, but that drop was unacceptable. I think his effort is becoming an issue as well. He made a business decision on that first onside attempt. So a lot of guys need to step up on the offense, even though they still played a good game against Indiana. They're going to have to play much, much better against Georgia because the step up in competition is just that significant. And as a whole, I mean, outside of Riley Mills, this team just needs to get healthy. Like Jeremiah Love, he's been dealing with the flu. He's got the knee injury. I hope that over the course of the next 10 days, he's going to get back closer to full health. That's going to be very important. I mentioned Rocco Spindler. Hopefully he's able to go. Bryce Young, I believe, is going to be able to play. He was running around after the game. I think it was just a stinger. So these guys, everyone else is just going to have to step up a little bit more because losing Riley Mills is a big, big blow. And it's just so disappointing for him and this team that has already dealt with so much on the injury front. But look, it's the college football playoffs. Injuries are going to happen to everyone. You can't really make excuses at this point. Like, you are in this position. You have a great chance going up against Georgia without your starting quarterback. You cannot let this one injury be the thing that lets the season finally crater all at that point. They have shown incredible resiliency all season long, and I have no reason to expect anything different going up against the Bulldogs. Well, it's a new format, but pretty much the same results for the first round of the college football playoff. We saw 4 blowouts, but I don't really understand why anyone is too surprised by all of this because the spread in every single one of those games was at least a touchdown. And I think most people looked at the matchups and thought, like, okay, like Notre Dame is significantly more talented than Indiana. Penn State is much more talented than SMU. Texas and Clemson on a talent level, they're probably a little bit closer, but like Clemson has not been nearly as good this season, and Texas has looked like a really good teams at different points this season. I think the one thing that caught everyone by surprise was how much Ohio State thoroughly dominated Tennessee, but it is kind of funny how it all worked out, right? Because after Notre Dame beat Indiana, everyone was like, oh, Indiana didn't even deserve to be in there. Kirk Herbstreit said they were outclassed and all that stuff. And then for SMU to just get destroyed by Penn State like that in the first game of the day didn't really help those discussions about the SEC. You got Lane Kiffin on Twitter crying for not being in the college football playoff. He's whining the college football playoff committee. But all of a sudden, all that talk from all the SEC people, they got real quiet when Ohio State was just putting it on Tennessee at night because it doesn't fit the narrative. And personally, that has been the most disappointing thing to me about the first round of the college football playoff. It's not that those games weren't entertaining. I won't lie to you. They weren't the most entertaining games, but like that happens in all sports. Like sometimes the first round series aren't great. So even though I was a little bit disappointed that they weren't as entertaining as I was hoping they'd be, I was way more disappointed in the discourse and the discussion about the college football playoff after the first weekend. Like, people didn't waste a second to just say that Indiana didn't deserve to be in there. And look, maybe they weren't one of the 12 best teams of the college football playoff, but like, yeah, it's easy to say that with the benefit of hindsight after watching Notre Dame just control them for the entire game. Like, I actually thought Indiana, even though they weren't nearly as good as Notre Dame, like, they have a pretty good defense. Notre Dame wasn't just moving the ball at will on offense, and they played well against Ohio State as well on defense. And yeah, like, their offense, it wasn't able to do anything, but like Notre Dame and Ohio State have 2 of the best defenses in the entire country. So like, I just think that people were way too quick to dismiss them and say they didn't belong. And then to then go and say that, oh, these 3 lost teams absolutely deserve to be in, like an Alabama who got beat by a 6-6 Oklahoma team late in the year, and Ole Miss who lost to Florida. Like, everyone is just trying to push their own agenda. And it took all of the attention away from all the great stuff that happened during the first round of the college football playoff. Like, look, I can just tell you right now, I have been very fortunate to go to a bunch of Notre Dame games in my life, and that's never lost on me because, like, when I was a kid growing up, we would get to go to like 1 Notre Dame game a year, and that was the best day of the year for me every single year, and it was such a treat. And then when I was a student there, obviously you get season tickets and all that stuff, so I've been to a bunch of Notre Dame games in my life. That game on Friday night, I think that was the most fun I've ever had going to a Notre Dame game. And I know that I'm not the only one who feels that way. That was such a special experience to have a home college football playoff game. So I feel like Notre Dame fans all feel that way. I bet Penn State fans absolutely love that experience. Ohio State, everyone who's able to host a playoff game, like that was an incredible scene for all of the schools involved. And I think we should be celebrating that, even though the games itself weren't that competitive. I think that there was so much special stuff going on in college football. But instead of appreciating that and recognizing that there's a lot of good stuff happening with this new format, everyone just started fighting each other about the SEC and who belonged to be in. And I just got so annoyed with all of that. Like, you've got some people who are big time figures in the sport and they just sound bitter and just grumpy. And I don't get it. Like, why are you so miserable talking about the sport that you're supposed to love and be like one of the main talking heads and all that? Like, I just don't get it to me. And I felt like the mood in South Bend on Friday night was so great. And I understand if you're an Indiana fan, it's not as good. Or if you're just a casual college football fan, like, it wasn't the most fun game to watch. But that scene came through on TV. And there was a lot of great stuff from that game and all the other games that happened this weekend. So for the fact that instead of talking about that and appreciating it, we're just like fighting with different people online and just saying like these teams didn't even deserve to be on the field. Like, what are you doing? Right? So I don't really get it. And I don't like talking about things and saying that this is a problem without presenting solutions. But like, I don't really know what the solution here is, because people like to say, oh, college football needs a commissioner. And while I agree with that point that a commissioner would do some good things for college football, like, why would anyone think that we're all just going to agree on one singular person to lead this sport? Because if the person has any SEC ties, then everyone's going to be like, oh, it's just going to be an SEC homer, all that stuff. And if it's not from the SEC, then all the SEC people are like, they don't get it. The best conference is not going to be well represented. They don't get it. We're playing at a different level than everyone else. It's just never going to end. And I don't really know if there's a fix to it, because like, I think whoever is on their side that they agree with, they're just going to defend that side and say the other side is wrong. Like, ESPN people are probably going to defend the SEC. Fox people are probably going to defend the Big Ten. Fans are going to defend their teams. And apparently, if you're a fan in the SEC, you also have to support your conference as well, which I find very odd. Like, Lane Kiffin tweeting out, let's go Vols before a playoff game. Like I know they're not like particularly rivals in the SEC, but if that happened in another conference, like, can you imagine Ryan Day saying, let's go Nittany Lions? Like, that would just never, ever happen. So anyway, it's all very weird. And I just don't think that there's going to be a fix here anytime soon, because no one is able to agree on anything. Like, for years, they were like, the BCS isn't good enough. We need a 4-team college football playoff. Then they get to 4-team college football playoff. There's blowouts in the first round. They're like, this isn't good enough. We need a 12-team playoff. These games are boring. Well, now we get the 12-team playoff, and after the first round, everyone is still whining and complaining. It's never going to end. We don't need more teams. There are not 12 teams every year who are capable of winning the national championship. That was never what this was about. It was about getting more games, because then there's more games on TV and there's more money for everyone involved, and people who weren't really a part of the national championship hunt before, now they think they are because it's a 12-team format. But as we saw this weekend, 12 teams are not capable of winning the college football playoffs. So this is just the way college football is. This is the way that it has been. And I'm afraid that it's not going to get better anytime soon. And I think a lot of that is because people are so focused on the wrong things. Like, if you love this sport, if you love college football, there was a lot of really great stuff to take in from this game, from the games this weekend. And I feel like no one is really talking about it. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because it's become almost like politics now, where you just have to defend your side so strongly. Like, no one is ever going to be like on the SEC side. When are you ever going to see someone like watch an ACC team be like, you know what, those guys actually are good. They're going to compete with us. It's never really going to happen. And I just really, I keep saying it. It's really, really disappointing. And I understand that the games weren't that entertaining, and it's probably not the best television product, but you look across all sports, there's blowouts in the NFL playoffs in the first round all the time. And there's just no perfect way to do this. There's going to be some subjective arguments going on, because nobody's playing in a real like even playing field, especially now with the mega conferences and how imbalanced these schedules are. It's only going to get worse, because you're going to have more teams who got by with an easy schedule.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Auburn adds Georgia Tech star receiver Eric Singleton.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers.
They're getting ready for the day. Maybe you're sipping on some coffee, and then you get notifications from all over the place that Eric Singleton, the top receiver in the transfer portal, the former Georgia Tech wide receiver, is now officially an Auburn wide receiver. We've been talking about this guy kind of sitting on pins and needles, waiting for the news to become official. Really since last Thursday. It happens early in the morning. Christmas came early for several Auburn fans this week.
You know, it's really kind of a conflicting thing. It was weird when the news dropped, but it was really kind of cool on an early Monday morning. I always check my phone first thing when I get up in the morning. I check all socials and all that, and I got up early. To start off a Monday morning, which is typically a blah day, but not during this week because, you know, Christmas is coming and all that.
Sure.
To start the work week off and a Monday morning, which is usually a drag your rear end into work kind of day, with that news, and like I said, I saw it at 6 a.m., man, it was just like, it was more caffeine injected me than a cup of coffee. I was ready to go. And I think you make a good point. I expected it Friday. Then I expected it Saturday. We got some word that it may happen yesterday. When I went to bed last night and it hadn't happened, I really thought this was going to go closer up to the December 28th day that the portal closed. And so it was a pleasant surprise to see that first thing this morning.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because there was so much talk on like rumor of how he signed, but Auburn's holding the papers or whatever and waiting to make the announcement, and they're being strategic with it. And that made sense to a certain point. Like we originally heard it Thursday, sounded like it was the original plan. And then Sunday was the next plan. It's like, okay, well, like what's going on here? And so who knows when he officially signed, but it became public Monday morning, and that's all that really matters. 56 receptions last year, 754 yards, 3 touchdowns, average catch of 13.5 yards down the field. When you look at what he did in 2023, 2 seasons ago, 48 catches for 714 yards, 6 touchdowns. This is a guy who's been really solid for Georgia Tech for the last 2 seasons, been a big, huge focal point of the offense for Georgia Tech. Entered the portal, was one of the coveted players in the entire transfer portal, not just receivers instantly. It was a very competitive battle. In fact, we thought, okay, Auburn was one of the first visits. I think it was his first visit. We were like, we can't let him leave. We can't let him get to Oxford. Then he did. And you had that Ole Miss guy that like crystal balls everybody in the world to Ole Miss, and he's hardly ever right. But he ended up being an Auburn Tiger. They're like, this is a big win. This is a big win. There's no matter how you slice this. This is a huge win for the Tigers.
Well, I always say the best sources for crystal balling people to Auburn is Tom Loy, Steve Wiltfong, and the Ole Miss guy. Because if he crystal balls someone to Ole Miss, he's coming to Auburn. Book it. And I think the other thing that I would keep in mind on this is I was watching the Georgia Tech game in a restaurant one night, and I could not stop saying, man, I would love to see that kid in orange and blue. He just popped. Singleton. Haynes King had a really good game that game too, but sure. Singleton just looked different on the field, and I was really hoping that he would get in the portal. You wish, or you kind of daydream and go, man, that'd be a kid, if he went in the portal, I'd love for Auburn to get. And then it comes to fruition. And I think it speaks volumes that he went to Ole Miss and still, obviously signed with Auburn, that Auburn had something that he wanted to sell. And again, this continues to me the just, I don't know, inexplicable way that Auburn can continue to get this high-level talent coming off 2 losing seasons. And I don't want to hear about NIL, and I don't want to hear about money, buying players. Everybody has money. And if you don't think that there's people in the conference that have more money than Auburn, then people are naive. They do. Somehow, some way, Auburn's selling this vision. And I like him. I like him for a veteran presence to replace KLS on the roster, not necessarily his position or where he plays, but just a body to replace a really good receiver.
Yeah. And I don't know. I talked about this with Lindsay on this morning show. Like, I don't know if Singleton necessarily like replaces KLS as far as role. He does replace him as far as impact and production, 100%, but they are not the same receiver. Or at least they haven't been up to this point. So I am curious to see what exactly.
Can I say one other point that I wanted to mention? I forgot. Tom Luganbill was talking about him on the next round, and he said he runs a 10-3 100-yard dash, that he's a burner.
Yeah.
Well, I know KLS seemed really fast because he got open and he got separation, but I suspect Singleton's a little bit faster, straight line speed. How sweet is that? My goodness.
Yeah, you take that. No question about it. You got to think, if you're Eric, like you got to be excited about the upside that Jackson Arnold brings in. And then obviously playing opposite of Cam Coleman, that's going to, allow you to have more one-on-one matchups. So it makes sense why he would want to come in. It does like bear the question of, how many productive wide receivers can Auburn have at this point? We said it going into last year. We talked about how last year's receiver room for Auburn was one of the best it's ever had. And I stand by that. They're just young. And I think the class or the room this year is going to be even better because I think Singleton's that good.
I like Horatio Fields too. And it depends on if you put if Auburn's offense goes into a four wide receiver set, think about the bodies they could throw out there. And then even you can go to 5 wide. If you go to a 5 wide empty set, no tight ends. It's limitless.
So right now, a 4 wide receiver set, whichever running back you want to pick, standing next to Jackson. And then you've got Cam Coleman, and I guess Singleton's out wide opposite Coleman. And then you've got Malcolm Simmons. Or do you put Fields out wide and you put Singleton at slot?
That's what I would do. That's
a lot to throw at somebody.
I'd put Fields and Coleman out wide, Simmons and Singleton inside on both sides as far as slot if you're going 4 receiver set, and then let someone try to cover that.
It's a lot. That's a lot. Oh, yeah, and also defend Jackson Arnold's legs, as well as, Damari or Jeremiah or Darrell, whoever's at running back. It's a lot. It's a good, the skill positions are certainly there. You can't blame the roster anymore. Can't blame the roster anymore, Daryl. This is it. You've got the roster that you wanted. Auburn has ponied up. They have said, okay, we're done with this. Like, you can't make the roster an excuse anymore. And I think that's very, very important.
It's with that comes an inherent amount of pressure, but that's okay. I truly believe.
Yeah, you're the head coach at Auburn.
You're the head coach at Auburn.
Pressure.
Exactly. And I know that it's already some inherent pressure because you're going on year 3 with 2 losing seasons. But when you have earned this roster, because Hugh Freeze is instrumental in putting some of this together, as well as Kenyatta Watson and Will Redmond. When you earn this roster, you've got all the tools now. You've got all the toys. There's no excuse. There is no grace period. There's no excuse, because here's the other thing. The narrative ends after this year. The grace period ends with, I think, trying to sell kids on a vision to get this type of talent in here. We've talked about how remarkable it is that Auburn's done that for 2 years.
Agreed.
I don't think you get a third. I think this is it. You're not going to be able to continue to do this and pull this off.